Okay, this is the fifth video now, and we're going to be looking at unemployment. And it's important to actually understand what do we mean by the term unemployment, and perhaps how do we actually go about actually measuring what it is. So what do we mean by this term? Well, we might think about the number of people who are unemployed. That's those people who are of working age, who are without work, but they're available to work at the current wage rates. Another way of looking at unemployment relates to the claimant rate. That's the number of people who are in receipt of unemployment benefits. And then again we have another rate called the standardised unemployment rate. And this is the number of people who are of working age, without work, but who are actively and available to start seeking work. And very important to actually remember in this last one, it's actually those people who are actively seeking work. So listen hard when you hear numbers quoted by the press and on the news and governments to actually hear which number they're referring to. And I think when we hear about unemployment, we think a lot about the performance of the economy. So let's have a look at some unemployment rates. Well, these are the rates in the UK set in January 2017. So currently, the standardised unemployment rate, so that's those people who are of working age, without work, and who are available to start work and actively seeking work, is 1.58 million. And those who are on job seekers or universal credit, or those who are claiming benefits, is on 0.73 of a million. And you can see this is less than half of the standardised unemployment rate. Now these figures are put together by the Office for National Statistics, who are responsible for all this official data. And if you look on the slides, you can click on the link to actually find out some other useful statistics. You can find out people on long-term sickness, who are retired, who are working full-time, working part-time. A lot of useful information. If we think about types of unemployment, there's two types, and they're both connected to supply and demand issues in ways we're quite familiar with now. And we have the equilibrium unemployment curve, perhaps the function of aggregate supply of labour and the aggregate demand for labour. And this largely relates to a function of wage rates. Then we get the disequilibrium unemployment, and it's caused by the excess supply of people at a given wage rate. And if we look at one of our graphs here, this is the equilibrium employment graph. So we can see the aggregate supply of labour and the aggregate demand for labour, and you see that's quite similar when we've been looking at these charts before. So the axis shows the average wage rate, that's the price the employees have to pay. That's the price the employers have to pay, just checking you're awake here, and the numbers of workers or employees. And we can see that demand curve increases as the wages fall, the aggregate demand, and the supply curve is lower at a given wage rate. So as the determinants shift, this curve, or supply and demand, responds in the way we're familiar with. So we have this average wage rate, which increases as more and more people are prepared to work, or they would rather work for themselves, and it can happen in reverse as well. If we look at this chart here, this is for the equilibrium unemployment, and you can see this time we have the addition of this N curve. It's the number of people who are actually available for work, and you can see the difference between A and B is the number of people who are out of work at a given wage rate. Important to remember that when this is in equilibrium, not everyone in the labour market will be employed. So N is the people who are searching for work. Perhaps they're in between jobs, they could just be made redundant. And not everyone who wants to work will actually be employed. So if we think about the equilibrium unemployment at a given wage rate, so when the labour market is equilibrium, it's inevitably in the labour market that not everybody is going to be employed. There's always going to be this churn of people in between jobs. Perhaps callers are people who are looking for the right job, who find themselves temporarily out of work. So the difference between the aggregate supply of labour and N, between B and A on the chart, shows the equilibrium level of the unemployment. So unemployment is basically the difference between the supply and the number of people who are in the labour market. So if we think about disequilibrium of unemployment, and it could be caused by excess of supply. So first of all, we think about the real wage unemployment, where wages are set and held above a rate which achieves equilibrium. So it creates a supply in the market, and the same as the excess supply in microeconomics. And this term, market clearing rate, is the correct term. So when the market rate is set high, it therefore means there's an excess of supply. Then we can think about the demand deficient unemployment, and it's caused by a shift to the left of the aggregate demand of labour. Perhaps it's actually being caused through the impact of recession, and we've discussed recession in previous weeks. So in recession, firms don't want to employ people, even at the same wage rate. It's a result as a shift in the curve, so at the same price we've actually lowered the demand, and it can actually cause unemployment. So we can have this cause of disequilibrium employment could actually be from the demand deficient unemployment. So they're both the same as the cause of excess of supply as in the microeconomic theory, and both cases can be corrected quite easily by changing the wage level. So where possible, for wage levels to come down will actually cause the excess of supply, and it will be called off, and some people you actually then find won't want to be employed at that level, so they decide they could do better by working for themselves. So they're not going to be entering the labour market, and they'll do something different. There also can be this impact of the minimum wage, so it may actually mean that the rate we can't achieve to bring these levels down, and which is actually causing the unemployment at a time of recession. So it can be very difficult to actually correct and bring this into equilibrium. And the unemployment may not actually be directly related to money, but it could be similar issues of, say, supply and demand, and it could have the same type of impact as in the microeconomics, and we'll be talking more about this in the lecture. What's really important is you go back over these 5 videos and look at the 5 slides and really get to grips with them, and then we can build on your knowledge when you come to the lectures next week.